Hello everybody, welcome back to Study is Key. That is, welcome back if you've been here before. If you've not been here before, welcome to the channel. Hopefully you'll stick around to the end of the video and then subscribe to the channel so you can stick around for future videos as well. Now, in this video today, we're going to be addressing a Roman Catholic myth. That is the myth that the Bible never says that we are saved or justified by faith alone. I know that Roman Catholics have their favorite line, oh, well, the only place in the Bible where the phrase faith alone is used is actually in James 2:24, and James specifically says that we are justified by works and not by faith alone. So the only place it's mentioned, it's actually negated. It says that we're not justified by faith alone. Now, I will say, probably the video after this one will be a video touching on James 2:24 specifically. So I'm not going to speak to that in this video today, but you can certainly subscribe if you are curious to hear what I will have to say on that passage. Today, what we're going to do is just flat out debunk the idea that the Bible never actually says that we're justified or saved by faith alone. And, people on my side, that is, will usually point to texts like Romans 3:28 that says that we are justified by faith apart from works of the law. They'll point to passages like Romans 4:5 that says that to the one who does not work but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness, and a host of other passages. But in this passage today, or in this video today rather, I'm going to point to a passage that I think most people don't really consider in this discussion, that they don't really turn to or even have in mind at all. And it's a very important passage. And it happens to be not located in one of the epistles of Paul, but actually in the Gospel of Luke. Now, Luke was a traveling companion of Paul's, and so it's not necessarily surprising that we would see this in the Gospel of Luke. But yeah, and it's also found in Mark as well. So we're going to turn to that shortly, but before we do that, we're going to look at John 11 for a little bit of context. In other words, I'm going to be setting the stage a little bit, setting the floor for the upcoming attraction in the book of Luke and the book of Mark. So in John 11, starting at verse 17, we read, "Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she sent and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you.' Jesus said to her, 'Your brother will rise again.' And Martha said to him, 'I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day.' And Jesus said to her, 'I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?' She said to him, 'Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world.' Verse 28, when she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, 'The teacher is here and is calling for you.' And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.' When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, 'Where have you laid him?' They said to him, 'Lord, come and see.' Jesus wept. See how he loved him? But some of them said, 'Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?' Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, 'Take away the stone.' Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, 'Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days.' Jesus said to her, 'Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?' So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, 'Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me.' When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come out. The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." So, why did I just read all of this? Well, let me begin by summarizing what we just read, and then I'll explain as we go into the next passage why I brought this up. So what we just read basically is Lazarus was on his deathbed, he had already been dead for 4 days, and Martha was deeply saddened by this. Obviously, Martha is Lazarus's sister, and Martha and Jesus, that is, they have a conversation following his death. And she says, "But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha said, "I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And in response to this, Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" So he's talking about the final resurrection, right? The eschatological event where God will give everybody their lives back who have believed in him. And this serves as a background to what comes later. In verse 40, he says, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So he's calling back Martha's attention to that previous conversation that was about final resurrection on the last day. And what he does next is actually raise Lazarus, not on the last day, but prior to it. And this is meant to prefigure the hope that the Christian has, the hope that is to come. And in fact, let me read one passage here in Romans 8, verses 23 to 24. Paul says, "And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies." This is resurrection language. And he goes on to say, "For in this hope we were saved." So salvation consists in the hope of resurrection. That just is what it is to be saved. It is to be raised from the grave. Now in Luke, we have a very similar event. In verse 49 of Luke 8, it says, "While he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, 'Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore.' But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, 'Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well.' And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James, and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, 'Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping.' And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, 'Child, arise.' And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened." And this is very similar to what we see in John, right? Back in John 11, and we didn't read this section, but what comes before what we read is actually quite relevant. In verse 4 of John 11, we read, "But when Jesus heard it," that is, that Lazarus was ill, Jesus said, "This illness does not lead to death. For it is the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Anyways, so we keep reading, and basically the disciples are informed of Lazarus's condition. And Jesus says to them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awake him." Right? At this point, Lazarus has died. But the way Jesus phrases it is, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awake him." Remember, he just said that this illness does not lead to death. And then the disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he'll recover." Right? The disciples here are being a little bit dense. They haven't understood that Jesus isn't speaking plainly. Of course, Lazarus has died, but Jesus is making a profound point that the death that he died is not permanent. And so Jesus goes on to say, now Jesus had spoken, or this isn't Jesus saying it, but it says, now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking a rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. Right? So Jesus earlier says this illness doesn't lead to death, and now he's saying Lazarus has died. This is obviously isn't Jesus contradicting himself. It's Jesus earlier speaking in not plain language and figurative language, right? Lazarus, this illness does not lead to death. Why? Because Lazarus will not be permanently dead as a result of it. It's more akin to sleep. He's going to be out for a while and then come back. So he's alluding to resurrection. The disciples don't understand. And so after telling them that he was asleep and them not understanding, he just says it plainly. He's like, guys, Lazarus is dead. And then he goes and does what he does, which is raise Lazarus from the grave to prefigure the hope that we have as Christians on the last day, the hope of resurrection. And very similarly here in Luke 8, you have, while Jesus was still speaking, you have someone from the ruler's house who comes and says, your daughter is dead, do not trouble the teacher anymore. So obviously these people identify the daughter as dead. And then Jesus later on says, do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. So again, it's the same thing as in John 11. You have somebody who is dead, but Jesus saying, hey, this person isn't dead, they're just sleeping. Now, Jesus isn't speaking plainly when he says that she's sleeping. He knows she's dead, but he's making a point that she's going to awake, that she's going to come back to life, that this is not a permanent state for the girl. And so he says, child, arise, and her spirit returned. He raised her from the dead. So this, too, is prefiguring the final hope that we have as Christians, the hope of resurrection. This is a prefigurement of that. And what is necessary, according to Jesus, for this hope to be a hope realized for the little girl? He says to Jairus, the girl's father, do not fear, only believe. Monon pisteuson. Only believe. This is what he says. Only believe and she will be made well. Now, some of you might not know this, but she will be well, literally in Greek, is she will be saved. In fact, the New American Standard Bible has a footnote here. It says, do not be afraid any longer, only believe, and she will be made well. But there's a footnote next to made well, and it says, or saved. And that's because that's what the Greek literally says. If you look at Young's literal translation, you read, be not afraid, only believe, and she shall be saved. The Christian Standard Bible, just for another example, says, do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be saved. The word for saved here in Greek is sozo, and sozo is the very same word used by Paul, for example, in Romans 8, verses 23 to 24 that we read earlier, where Paul says that it is in this hope, that is the hope of the redemption of our bodies, that we are saved, sozo. And so this is very relevant, right? He's not just using this language to mean that she will be well in the sense that, she'll recover from whatever illness killed her, but the language used, the language chosen, is chosen precisely because it is prefiguring the final hope of resurrection. Our salvation consists in our resurrection, and this is prefiguring that. And what is necessary for one to be saved? What is necessary for one to be raised unto life? Only believing. That is faith alone. That's not my words. It's not my inference from Romans 3:28 or Romans 4 verse 5 or from some other statement from Paul. It's not an inference. It is straight up what Jesus says. He says, do not fear, only believe, and she will be saved. Only believe, and she will be saved. That's it. I don't have to explain this any more than I have. Prefiguring our final hope, Jesus says, only believe, and you'll be saved. That's it. This is meant to be a picture for us. We are supposed to take something from this story, which is, don't fear, only believe, and you'll be raised unto life. That's what you're meant to take from this. Is it any surprise that we see this in Luke as a companion of Paul? And in fact, I said earlier that you can see this in Mark as well. In Mark, we read, "And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, 'My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be well and live.'" Now, you get down here to verse 35, and you read, "While he was still speaking," just like in Luke's account, "there came from the ruler's house some who said, 'Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?' But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, 'Do not fear, only believe.'" Verse 39, "And when he had entered, he said to them, 'Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping.'" Again, just like in John and just like in Luke. And then he says, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And she rises from the dead. So you have Mark 5:36 that says, "Do not fear, only believe." And you have Luke 8:50 that says, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be saved." Sozo, the standard word always used to refer to salvation. And by the way, I'm not saying that that word always necessarily refers to final salvation, but what I'm saying is when you do have passages that speak of final salvation, that's the word used. So again, in John 11, Lazarus dies. He says to the disciples, he's not dead, but asleep. And what he means by that is, no, okay, yeah, plainly Lazarus is dead, but it's not permanent because he's going to rise from the dead. And that's the hope we have, or that you guys have. You know, I'm pretending to be Jesus here. That's the hope that you guys have on the final day. And let me show you guys that. Let me prefigure that by raising Lazarus from the dead. And you have the same kind of thing here in Luke 8. The little girl dies, and Jesus, instead of speaking in plain speech, says, you know, don't worry, she's not dead, she's sleeping. And then the people laugh, and they just know that she's dead. But Jesus then goes on to show what he means. He's not speaking plainly. He means her death isn't permanent. And this again is prefiguring our hope as Christians, the hope of resurrection. And he says to Jairus, only believe, and she will be saved. And then he says, child, arise, and she rises from the dead. So what is necessary to be risen from the dead? What is necessary to be saved? Do not fear, only believe. Only believe. Now, again, before signing off, I just want to say that I know a lot of you, if Catholics return from my previous video, a lot of you are going to be like, well, what about James chapter 2, verse 14? What about James chapter 2, verse 24? Hold your horses. I'm well aware of the existence of these verses, and I'm going to address James 2:24, perhaps James 2:14 as well in the next video. But the point is, I know they exist. Don't you worry. Don't go commenting, throwing them at me, thinking that you're, giving me something I've never seen before. I know they exist. I know how to handle them. I know what they mean. And I'm looking forward to probably giving you some information that most of you haven't heard before or considered on James 2:24. But anyways, I hope this video today was entertaining. For those of you who do believe that we are saved by grace through faith alone, I hope that these passages are passages that you'll keep close to your chest, that you will remember from now on. Luke 8:50, Mark 5:36. Remember those. You need not only turn to Paul to defend this doctrine. You can turn to the entirety of the New Testament, and you can find this doctrine taught. So I hope that you guys enjoyed and will like the video, subscribe if you enjoyed it. Just, leave your mark. Let me know this was helpful, this was informative, whatever. I love when you guys comment, mostly the respectful comments. I'm happy to try to engage with as many people as I can, but look, I had some people commenting under my previous video who were acting somewhat entitled, as if I was running from them or something. The previous video had between 400 and 500 comments, okay? If I didn't get back to you, okay, if you were trying to have a long back and forth with me and I didn't get to everything, sorry, it's not that I'm avoiding you. I just do not have the time to get back to everyone. So hopefully you guys can understand that. I'll see you guys in the next video. Till then, remember that study is key.